This is part 3 of How Did People Get Food and Clothing? You didn't need much money to buy food if you lived in the country. Most homes had a vegetable garden. Also, you could pick wild fruits and berries and nuts. You could catch fish and hunt for deer and wild turkeys. Nothing was wasted. Animal bones were saved and made into buttons. Goose feathers were used to stuff pillows. Reeds and twigs were woven into baskets. Old pieces of cloth and outgrown clothing were cut into squares and sewn into quilts. During the war years, quilt making invented patterns they called Washington's puzzle or Washington's plumes. Patriots who lived in cities often received food, clothing, and other necessities from relatives or friends who lived in the country. You could also trade with Patriot neighbors. Sometimes you just did without. How did you go shopping in the city? Loyalists who lived in cities had to buy most of their food and necessities. It was hard to store food in the city, so people shopped at the market every day, but Sunday, when it was closed. Church bells would ring to announce the opening of the market and the close of the market day. Tuesday and Friday were the biggest market days. Shoppers went from stall to stall buying meat and vegetables. You could buy bread at the baker's, and you could also take your meat and pies there to cook in his oven. Butter, milk, and eggs could be delivered to your house. It did become harder to get food in the cities as the war continued. Patriots asked farmers not to take food from their crops into the markets to sell. But as long as British goods could get shipped in and the people had the coins to buy them, they had food and other things they needed. Did you go to school if your family supported the Patriots? In colonial times in the northern colonies, some boys and girls ages 6 to 8 were taught reading and writing in the dame school. The teacher was a woman who lived in the neighborhood. Both boys and girls could have gone on to common school for another 3 or 4 years, but usually only boys continued. If boys wanted to attend college, they needed Latin school. Some boys who had to help on the family farm, did not go to school at all, and neither did most black children. Both common school and Latin school were taught by a man called a schoolmaster. If the schoolmaster in your area did not enlist in the army, the school probably remained open. There weren't many books to read because books were considered too valuable for children to have. You may have used the New England Primer to learn how to read. The book had a little rhyme for each letter of the alphabet. Before the war, many of the verses praised the king and queens of England. The rhyme for the letter K was, King Charles the Good, no man of blood. That meant that King Charles was a peaceful king who did not like wars and bloodshed. When the war began, a new verse for the letter K was printed. It showed how the people felt about the royal rulers now. Queens and kings are gaudy things. Even the picture of King George in the front of the book was replaced by a picture of George Washington or some other Patriot leader. In the middle and southern colonies before the war, there weren't as many schools as in the north. Families with money may have had a tutor come to their house for the children. Sometimes a minister would teach children in a one-room school for a fee. Many boys and girls had little chance for formal schooling. This continued during the war. There were 9 colleges in the colonies, 8 in the north and 1 in the south. Before the war, but all closed during the fighting. Some college buildings were used as hospitals, houses for the soldiers, or horse stables. Why didn't girls go to school as much as boys? There was not much work for women outside of the home, so many people felt it was not important for girls to learn much reading and writing. Girls did learn from other women in the house how to cook, sew, spin, take care of the house, and raise children. Some families felt that girls could learn as well as boys, and they taught their daughters at home. Sometimes a schoolmaster in a Latin school would teach girls at the schoolhouse during the hours that the boys were not there, between 6 in the morning to 7:30 in the morning, or 4:30 to 6 p.m. at night. Did you go to school if your family supported the Loyalists? Loyalists felt they had to protect their children after the war started. Boys and girls may have been sent to attend school in Canada, England, or other countries in the British Empire. You lived at the school or with a relative. If you stayed in America, there were a few private schools, mostly in the South. School could last 8 hours a day, Monday through Saturday. On Sunday, there was always some type of religious meeting. But if a tutor could be found, your parents probably kept you at home, and the tutor came to give you lessons. A parent or an older brother sometimes taught younger children. You learned to read or write using textbooks printed in England. Ink was made by buying ink powder and mixed with water. You may also have learned to speak French, dance, and play a musical instrument. Poor children in the South may have gone to field schools, where lessons were taught outdoors by some adults. Slaves, even if they supported the British cause, were not usually provided with education. How did you get news about the war and what was happening in the other colonies? Getting news was important to the Patriots, even before the war began. Each colony had set up a committee of correspondence. who hired its own riders to carry out messages by horseback. This was long before the telephone, radio, television, or even telegraph had been invented. Messages were delivered from one town to the next until all colonies received the news. Sometimes information was sent by ship instead of overland. After the war began, the committees of correspondence formed committees of safety. Their riders were constantly in danger of being captured by the British. Children were sometimes used as messengers. One young messenger was 9-year-old John Quincy Adams, who later became the 6th President of the United States. He took messages from his mother, Abigail, in Braintree, Massachusetts, to his father, John, in Boston. Another way to find out the news was from the newspaper. The Boston Gazette and the South Carolina Gazette were two papers that reported news with a patriot view. The Royal Gazette in New York was the best known of the Loyalist newspapers. Most newspapers were printed only once a week and had 4 pages with 3 columns on each page. In small towns, a town crier, sometimes a schoolboy, might share news aloud. As more and more people learned to read, there was less need for the town crier. Pamphlets and books were also printed. Thomas Paine's Common Sense had sent the idea of freedom throughout the colonies when it was published in January of 1776. It was often reread and shared during the war. On the last page, in bold letters, were the words, "The free and independent states of America." As thousands of people read the 47 pages, they saw themselves as the United States. More news could be found on posters called broadsides that were nailed to trees, poles, and buildings. Broadsides were used to get men to join the army for various public announcements. Who were the famous patriots? The most well-known were the men who helped promote the idea of freedom. George Washington, a planter and soldier from Virginia, was chosen to be commander of the Continental Army. Called the father of our country, Washington was a strong leader who held the army together when the soldiers faced many problems. Patrick Henry from Virginia was known as the Son of Thunder because of his patriotic speeches. He started many people thinking about freedom when he said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Paul Revere was a silversmith in Boston. He was a leader of the Sons of Liberty, a messenger, and a secret agent for the Patriots. On April 18th, 1775, Revere made his famous midnight ride from Boston to Lexington, Massachusetts, to warn the citizens that the British Army was on its way. Revere was captured, but he escaped safely the next day, and the Battle of Lexington and Concord marked the beginning of the American Revolution.